introduction to what do our value-added reports look like this year. I know a lot of you have seen this before, so a lot of it will be review. The newest thing that we have available this year is that differential effects, that student group part of the report that I'm really excited that we're able to get you this year. So I'm expecting a lot of questions about that part. We have some explanation of what that is that I'm hoping is going to help everybody know what that is. But please ask me questions. This is the first time that we're talking about differential effects in Wisconsin. I want to get all those questions. I've been getting emails. We want to think about how can we get some answers ready for everybody that they're emailing us about what does this new part mean, or even what does the old part mean. So please interrupt me along the way when things don't make sense. You want me to go slower, whatever we want to do. So our first page on our PDF reports is our introduction page. This one has some of the background information about what is included in this report and a little bit about how to understand the color coding. We've got some report context that talks about it's the WKCE that we're measuring here. New this year on this first page, for clarification's sake, we have listed fall 2011 WKCE to fall 2012 WKCE. That was some good feedback we got from DPI about how can we better explain to people what time period we're talking about when we label this 11-12 report. You'll notice this is a little bit laggy, unfortunately. The 11-12 school year is the latest school year that we have data on due to this November testing with the WKCE. So that's the school year we're talking about. It's not the one that's just ending now. This is the year before that for this value-added report. The second page of the report is where we have the school level value added and the grade level value added results. The school level's at the top, those grade level team estimates are below that. So I'm going to dig down a little bit about what's the anatomy of one of these reports, and we're going to look at the school level as an example. You'll notice that we have these subjects here. Reading and math are the subjects that we're evaluating on the WKCE here. We have the level of analysis. School level value added, that means that we're looking at all the grade levels combined at your school and finding out overall how did your school do at these different subjects for growing your kids. We have the past academic year, that's the 2011-2012 school year, and then we have an up to 3-year average. If we have data for your school going back 3 academic years, we have that included in the report for you. This is a way to see overall across different cohorts of kids going through my school, what is my effect on average with those multiple groups of kids. We have our 1 to 5 scale. 3 in the middle, that's the state average. It's labeled state average on your reports. That is the average growth for kids like yours across the state. That includes the starting point, that achievement level of your kids. When they came to you, how much did they know? And then different demographic characteristics. We take into account a number of things to find out how much did similar kids across the state grow. If you get a 3, that means that you're right on track with how similar kids across the state grew. These are standard deviation units, if you want to think a little statistically about this, on the 1 to 5 scale. Almost all our estimates are going to fall between that 1 to 5 range, but you could be lower than 1 or higher than 5 on this scale. There isn't a hard limit on this. We have the number of students included in the analysis. I'll go a little bit more into detail about why that isn't a whole number shortly. It's about mobility of kids. We also have the meat and potatoes of this report. We have the value-added estimate in a color-coded bubble to help you with proper interpretation of these estimates. The number inside is our point estimate. That's our best statistical estimate of the effect of your school. But below that, we have our 95% confidence interval. That's the kind of the give and take here. We can tell you exactly how much your kids grew, but we can't tell you exactly what was the effect of your school on the growth of those kids, which is what we're trying to measure with value added. That's why we have this black line to account for factors like measurement error in the test or lucky or unlucky factors that may have happened. That black line is how we're being responsible in our reporting to you about how sure are we that in this example, 1.7 is due to something that the school is doing or kind of random effects that we don't have data for. This is the lower part of that page 2. This is where we go into our grade level teams. And I'm going to go through a few frequently asked questions to kind of head off some of the misperceptions that we might have. This first one is about what school year is this? And unfortunately, it is a little bit lagged here. We have the 2011-2012 school year, and I'm going to explain why that's the case. So for value added on the WKCE, I have here noted the 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade examples of when does the test occur, and it's November. It would be great for growth modeling purposes if the kids were tested either on the first day of school or the last day of school, because that would be the cleanest timeline for us, but we know that's not reality. So what are we working with here? November testing. Let's think about 4th grade here. That November test that the kid takes in 4th grade, that's when we measure the starting knowledge of that kid. That represents our best way at using the WKCE to find out how much did the kid know when they came to this 4th grade teaching team. Again, not the first day of school, but close enough that that's the best measure that we have available. When we're looking at value added, we want to look at longitudinal growth of kids. So if a kid took the November test in 2011 for 4th grade, 1 year later, in November of 2012, they're going to take the 5th grade WKCE the following November. The growth between the 2011 WKCE in 4th grade and the November 2012 5th grade is how we're measuring growth during the 4th grade school year for value added. You'll notice that it doesn't perfectly align, but it mostly aligns with growth during the 4th grade year. That's the 2 test events that we're using to measure 4th grade value added. So as kind of the bonus question here, why don't we have 8th grade value added in Wisconsin, even though the kids take an 8th grade WKCE? Yeah, that's right. No 9th grade test. 8th grade is the starting knowledge in 8th grade. We can't measure how did they grow during the 8th grade because we don't have that 9th grade test as the post-test, that outcome. Now, it'd be great if we could be giving you the 12-13 school year here that's just coming to a close to know how well did you know, how well did we do there, but how are we going to know how much the kids grew during this school year? What's the next test that they're going to take? November of 13. Now, naturally, and I wish we had the scores for that right now, but we don't. So this time next year, you're going to be knowing how did the kids know how much did they grow during the school year that's just concluding now. We're hoping that in the future, with this smarter balance transition that's happening in the spring, this is going to be a lot better for time alignment. If the kids are taking the test during the spring, our hope is we'll get good turnaround times for that data and be able to give you more actionable information that's about the school year that just ended. In the meantime, this is what we have. This up to 3-year average part. We've got on the left side, we have that past academic year. That's what I just explained, the time period, but we also have this up to 3-year average. Let's think about what that means. I'm going to first tell you what it's not, and then I'm going to tell you what it is. So what is it not? It is not, let's pick Jimmy as an example, and let's think about the 3rd grade score for value added. It's not Jimmy as he takes the 3rd grade test in the 4th grade, and then Jimmy again as he takes the 4th and 5th, and Jimmy again as he takes the 5th to 6th. We're not doing that. We're not following an individual kid over 3 years. This is not a student measure. What we're doing is we're trying to figure out the educator's performance. We use student data to figure that out. It's still longitudinal student growth that we're looking at, but when we look at 3-year averages, what we are doing is looking at the 3rd grade teaching team as they serve 3 different cohorts of students. In this case on the report, we're looking at how did the 3rd grade teaching team do in the 09-10 cohort as the kids moved from 3rd grade to 4th grade. We're looking at the next cohort from 2010 to 11, and the 3rd cohort that we're looking at is the 11-12 cohort of kids as they went through that 3rd grade teaching team at your school. It's important to note that the teaching teams may have changed over time. It might be the case that one of your teachers was mobile. Maybe in the 2009-10 school year, you only have one of those teachers is still at your school in the 11-12 school year that you had completed last year. So think about that. It's not necessarily tied to specific teachers. It's about whatever teachers made up your teaching teams during these 3 cohorts. I have one more example here to illustrate what are we actually giving you today. This past academic year is going to be the 11-12 third graders in the left-hand column. And in the right-hand column, we have the 9-10 third graders, 11-12 third graders, and 10-11 third graders and 11-12 third graders. They're side by side for no really good reason here other than to note that these are the three cohorts of data that go into your academic growth during the 3-year average third grade value added estimate. And for this school, if it's an elementary school, we'd have the 3rd grade, the 4th grade, and the 5th grade teaching team, and multiple cohorts of kids for those 3-year averages. Here's a little quiz. I'll give you, how about 1 minute to talk in your groups about these 3 questions, and then I want to hear if we're making sense here about report interpretation. So talk with your group for a minute, and then we'll report out. All right, let's do these 3 questions, and then we're going to talk about some smarter balance stuff. This first one, and if you wouldn't mind, how about let's just shout this out, and hopefully we have some consensus here, unless I phrase the question too poorly. Which grade level teaching team was most effective during the 2011-2012 school year? 5th grade, that's right. So how are we coming to that conclusion? During this past academic year, 2011-2012, the highest point estimate we have here is the grade 5 team, 4.4. Now, I wouldn't recommend necessarily, if this was your school, saying 5th grade team, you are awesome, 4th grade team, you are lower, therefore you're not as good, something like that. Look at how much overlap we have with the confidence intervals. They're both green. These are 2 areas of really good success. This grade level 3 team, they're even above average. They're gray, they're right on track. Our best guess is they're a little bit above average, but grade 5, perfectly, that's the right answer to the first question. All right, what about this next one? Which grade level teaching team was most effective over the past 3 school years? 3rd grade, right. So when we look over at that 3-year average, this is having more data from multiple cohorts of kids going through. That 3rd grade teaching team, that's our green one. We got a 3.5 green. We're statistically significant results here that we are statistically sure that this grade level teaching team is having above average growth of their kids due to something that they are doing. What about this last one? Which grade level teaching team was more effective in this past academic year than they were in the past? 4th grade. Now, conveniently, they had 1 grade level and three questions, so that does work out. That's right. So if we look at the 4th grade teaching team over this 3-year average, it looks like it was really below average performance here. The red color code means that growth with these kids was far below average. If we look over the, in this case, 9-10, 10-11, and 11-12 cohorts, overall we're seeing really low growth of this teaching team. But this past academic year, something's different. They have a green result. This is above average growth at this school. So this would be an opportunity to think about, as a professional learning community, what did we do different this past year that we hadn't done in the previous 2 years? It could be anything. It could be we did a curriculum change. Maybe we had a new teacher come in that was really a go-getter and got the whole team going. Or maybe something not so great happened those 2 prior academic years. We can tell you what happened. We can't tell you why it happened with value added. But this would be a really good success story at your school to celebrate. And hopefully we'd see in the 12-13 school year that strong growth continued. One of the questions that I've already gotten that I think other people have asked is about the smarter balanced transition in Wisconsin. We have run models at VARC that go from one test to another, and in general that works just fine. For example, we might use, I've seen studies where we've used the MAP to predict the WKCE, and that worked even better than using the WKCE to predict the WKCE in some cases. But we can go from one test to the other, and as long as they're both measuring roughly the same content, usually it works out fine. So if there's a math portion on the WKCE and a math portion on the smarter balance, statistically we should be able to make that connection. The downside, the part that is not so clear what's going to happen, is that there's going to be a gap with the testing timeline between these two tests. If we tested WKCE in the spring every year, and then Smarter Balanced was in the spring, we'd have a good alignment of a school year between the WKCE and the Smarter Balanced. But as I understand it, we're going to have November, a fall test in the WKCE, and then not test in the spring, not test in that following fall, and wait till the following spring to measure again with the Smarter Balanced. And if you'll count those school years with me, that's 2. So our whole work here with Value Added is trying to measure how did one grade level team or one academic year, how much growth occurred. When we're looking at 2 whole years together, it's going to be really tricky for us to try to find out, was it growth that occurred in 3rd grade or was it growth that occurred in 4th grade? Because the kids have gone through both of those grade levels between our pre-test and our post-test events. So kind of that's the stage that I'm setting up. I don't necessarily have all the updates on the solution. Now we've got frequently asked question 3. Let's look at this example here. We have a red 3rd grade, a yellow 4th grade, and a green 5th grade. Does this show student growth to go from red to yellow to green over time? Does that make sense or does that not make sense?
Well, it's the same year as 3 different groups of kids.
Yeah, this is 3 different groups of kids. 3 different groups of kids, and then I want to reiterate that this is all about growth. Like, this is a growth year, a growth year, a growth year. If this was an achievement report, this would be growth. You'd have a really low achievement and then medium achievement and then high achievement. That would be thinking about growth. But that's not what this is. This is a growth year followed by another growth year followed by another growth year. So I'd like you to, in your groups, describe the new example I have up here. Describe this school's math performance and then describe this school's reading performance. And just 30 seconds here talking to your groups, and then we'll report out. What's happening at this school's math teams?
Well, they're all consistently green. That would be that maybe the school as a school doing something together.
So consistent high growth at this school. The 3rd grade team's having a lot of growth. The 4th grade team's having a lot of growth. The 5th grade team's having a lot of growth. This is a consistent high growth school. What's happening in reading at this school?
Learning to read and reading to learn.
Learning to read and reading to learn. So our 3rd graders are having tremendous growth here. Once we get to 5th grade, the kids aren't growing very quickly. So this is just always think about growth here. Which you might have the misperception in the previous slide that we were looking at that the 3rd grade team's doing really well because they went from red in 3rd grade to yellow in 4th grade. That's not what this is. This is showing that the 3rd grade team's not doing so well because it's just growth internally by each line. Hopefully I'm adding clarity and not confusion. If you have follow-up questions, you can always email us about further clarification on any of this stuff. We really want to make sure everybody in Wisconsin knows how to interpret these. So I hope I didn't just cause my inbox to explode. Frequently asked question 4, why is this a non-integer number of students? We aren't cutting students up in any way. This is about mobile kids. So we're going to be having mobility in our model this year. In addition to this, we also have a control that's new this year for mobility. Where are we tracking mobility with kids? If kids move schools between the time they took the WKCE in that first time, our pretest time, and the end of that school year, if they move schools, we can find out how much of the school year were they at one school versus the other, and we give partial credit for each school for the growth of those kids. And in addition to that, we also have a control in the model that says, across the state of Wisconsin, did mobile students grow faster or slower than others? And if that's the case, we've controlled for that too. That's new for people that have seen us talk about this before. In fact, I think it was even a suggestion we got at last year or the year before that about that'd be really cool if you controlled for that, so now we do. I want to talk about, again, related to number of students, why might this be lower than what you're expecting? Like maybe you know that there's 60 third graders at your school and there's only 55 in my report. What happened to those 5 kids? Here are some examples of why the number might be lower than you're expecting. It might be that there's lack of test scores. We need to have both November 11 and November 12 scores for these kids in order for them to be included in our model. We need to have a definitive data file that tells us that this kid went to your school. If that's missing, if we can't tell that Jimmy was at your school, then we can't link it and put it on your report. That's usually not the case that that's missing, but just FYI. And then something about, this one's about if the kids have to take the standard WKCE to be included in the analysis. Students with accommodations, those are included. We didn't drop those kids. Keep in mind with special ed, for example, if a kid did not take the regular WKCE, they're not included in this analysis, even when we're thinking about the new subgroup performance, that student group differential effects page, which we're about to get to. Some people in the room had seen that before. I think this is new for absolutely everybody now, so I'm expecting more questions, and this is probably the trickiest part of the report to think about what we're doing here. This is the student group results, a.k.a. differential effects, if you want to talk in the cool economist lingo. The groups that we have results for are the disability status of students, the economic status of students, gender, and English proficiency. There's a couple here that we have reported in other districts that we don't have in Wisconsin yet because we're still trying to just work out with our statewide models what's the best way to do it. And those two are by prior achievement level and the race ethnicity of students. So we're aware that those would be two cool things to have on the reports that we don't have this year. We're still working out the econometrics behind how to get you that. It has to do with whether or not it's just a yes or no thing or a multi-categorical thing if you want to think about the nerd details. Student group results, what is this? This is also called differential effects, and we're trying to answer the following question with this data. It's how effective was my school at growing certain groups of students? The results that we've had before were all in aggregate of all the kids at my school. How did I do? Now we're thinking about certain groups at my students at my school. How do we do with them? This is a little bit of a stylized example of how we would do this statistically. I made this yesterday. I had a couple economists look at it. They gave me the nod that it looks pretty good. This is a little bit of a PD stylized example again, but just to get the point across of what are we doing when we produce these results. What we've seen in prior years in these reports, or currently on page 2, is the overall results. This is the school level and the grade level team on page 2. This is what we're doing. We're looking at my school, which has a certain makeup of different student groups, and I find across the state of Wisconsin, statistically, how did similar students in Wisconsin do on that test? How much did they grow? And how did my kids at my school grow compared to that comparison group of kids with similar characteristics? That's what we're used to seeing. The new part is we're going to use differential effects, this student group report, and we're going to demonstrate how that happens with female students, for example. So I just picked this one. It's the same way across all these others. I used gender, female as our example. The first thing that we're going to do is reduce our sample of students to just the females at this school. So you'll notice that this last pie chart is just all pink now, and I picked pink because, you know, that's easy to just link up in our minds that that's girls. Okay. So the female students, they're all the ones that we're looking at now, and then above that, all those other pie charts, you can notice that there's some other slight changes. Our females at our school might be slightly different in their other characteristics than our students at our school overall. So we do take that into account when we're thinking about this. So now that we're looking at just the females at my school, I'm going to look at the state of Wisconsin, just at females in Wisconsin, and then again taking into account all those other demographic characteristics too, including starting point, the most important one, but also all these other ones. How did my female students at my school grow compared to similar female students from across the state of Wisconsin? That's how we're calculating our student group results here. And I have some checks for understanding here so we can look at it. What kind of output does this look like? If my females grew faster than similar students across Wisconsin, I'd get a green or a blue one. If they were about on track, I'd get gray. And if my females were growing slower than similar females across the state, I'd get a yellow or a red result. Here's an example I wanted you to talk about in your groups. We have the with disabilities and without disabilities student groups report. How about in the interest of time we just talk about this, because I notice I don't want to go too far over. at this school, which student group is growing faster than their similar peers from across the state? Students with disabilities, exactly. So that one's pretty straightforward. I also want to note that on the right-hand column, this up to 3-year average, it says insufficient data. This will get filled in future years once we have done student group performance in the future. So right now it's blank for everybody. Just expect that. You're not going to get that this year because it's the first year we've done this. Here's where it starts to get a little bit tricky. Does this mean that the with disabilities group grew more points on the test, more scale score points, than the without disabilities group? It does not mean that. That's a no to this question. Remember, we're comparing on this top row, how did my students with disabilities grow compared with other students with disabilities, and that was above average. How did my without disabilities students grow compared to other without disabilities students? That was below average. That doesn't mean that the with disabilities students grew more points than the without disabilities students. And why is that the case? It might be that across the state of Wisconsin, the with disabilities students grew slower overall than the not disabled students. So just always think about what are we comparing against. It's within students with similar characteristics. Here's another one. If the with disabilities group is green or blue at my school, does that mean we are closing the achievement gap with this group? No, it doesn't mean that. Achievement gap closing would be a different thing. It could be that I'm growing my students faster than other disabled students, but they still might not be growing fast enough to close an achievement gap. So this is about how did I do compared with across the state of Wisconsin with students like mine who are disabled. It's not saying are we closing a gap. Here's another example. We're looking at English proficiency with 2 groups. What do these results mean? Which group of kids does it look like I have the most improvement that I could make if I start making some changes at my school? It looks like there's a lot, like maybe I could do something with the LEP instruction that I'm doing at my school. It looks like it's far below average. Maybe I want to investigate what's going on there and see how can we better meet the needs of our students. Now, I wouldn't want you to go to your schools and say, and naturally we're going to see this because LEP students grow slower than non-LEP students, right? I mean, we know that's going to happen, so that's why this is red and the other one's gray. What's wrong with that thinking?
LEP students are compared to other students in the same category.
That's exactly right. These LEP students are compared with other LEP students across the state. And not only were they compared with other LEP students, but they were compared with other LEP students with the same category label. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're taking that into account when we're doing these comparisons. So how did my LEP group compare with other LEP students across the state by level? And then also free reduced lunch status, race, ethnicity, prior achievement. We're controlling for all those things when we're giving you these results. So this is saying my school is not very effective at growing the LEP students in math. Scatter plots. Now, okay, I just blew through our differential effects in our student group report. I heard some really good answers to questions, so I think we're on the same page. Are there any other questions from people before I move on to the scatter plots? Because all that was new for everybody in the room except for me because I made it last night. Yes?
You mentioned the LEP was relative to the LEP score. Is the same true for the disability category?
That's a really good question. This question was about, I talked about the LEP categories. What about disability? What we did is we grouped them by certain types. So, you know what? I have exactly what we did in a slide in the notes. Boy, I hope somebody can help me with the acronyms. Okay, I think CD, cognitive disability and learning disability is one group. EBD, emotional behavior disability is one. A, is that autism? That's another. Speech and language for 4. Then we grouped, boy, this is the general characteristics that we were doing. So we grouped these together in these groups because we thought, you know, it's different if you have a speech and language versus autism. So it would make sense to treat those as different things. So that's the level of detail that we're getting this year in our comparison. All right, you'll notice on the scatter plots this year, we are using the new NAEP-aligned proficiency cut scores on our scatter plots. We have school level value added and achievement and scatter plot interpretation below. For people that have not seen this before, on the x-axis we have the value added, for these schools. And on the y-axis, we have the percent proficient advanced on the pretest, on that starting point. This is how we're thinking about the power of two measures. It's important to think that we want to know how much do my students know, but also how much do my students grow. All right, so we got this, remember the power of two, we've got achievement and we have value added. What we're doing is we're plotting both of these things on our scatter plots. So I'm going to go through what does it mean to be in these different portions of the scatter plot. If you're up to the right, that means your students know a lot and are growing faster than predicted. Since we're up high on the y-axis, that means that my students are mostly proficient or advanced, and I'm far to the right, meaning that my students are growing a lot. And you can notice I have not yet updated this graphic to the NAEP aligned proficiency cut scores. Just an FYI, that does not affect the value-added estimates. It's not going to be like everybody's going to take a dive in value-added because we have a new proficiency cut point. And why is that? It's because we're looking at scale score growth. We don't care that more of your students are not proficient right now. We just want to know what does the actual number they scored on the test. So you can just don't think that because fewer of your students are proficient, that's going to mean your value-added is going to go down. This is my favorite part of the scatter plots, this group B. These are schools where the students are far behind, but they're growing faster than predicted. These are schools where under No Child Left Behind proficiency type metrics, they've been told year after year, you're not a good school because your students don't know a lot. But it could be the case that there's a whole bunch of reasons that that's the case and it's not your school. What we're seeing with the x-axis here, value added, is that these students are growing way faster than we would predict based off of similar students in the state. So your students are behind, but they're growing a whole heck of a lot compared with similar students across the state. So keep doing what you're doing. You're growing them a lot. This is what we want to see. It could be the case that I continually have high value added year after year, but I'm not moving up any in proficiency. Imagine I'm in elementary school that just, my kids come in and they are way, way behind. And no matter how much I grow them, they're still not getting to proficient. We're telling you with value added, you're doing the right things. You are making tremendous growth with your kids, but we can see that they're coming in really low. And it could be that I'm in elementary school, and by the time I'm in 5th grade with my kids, they're growing a lot, but they're still not there. Our hope is as they continue through the education program and they get more high growth years that eventually they'll get to proficient, but you shouldn't be dinged because your kids are coming in a couple of grade levels behind and you're making tremendous growth, but they're not there yet because you haven't had enough time to get them where they want to be. Conversely, this is the hardest sell. This is where people tell us that our model's wrong. We haven't controlled sufficiently for various things. This is where students know a lot, but the students are growing slower than predicted. So maybe a lot of my kids are proficient and advanced at this school, but we're kind of the bearer of bad news that although your kids know a lot, they're really not growing as much as similar kids across the state. So we could be doing more. Maybe they're all proficient already, but there's still room to grow. Now, if somebody came up to you and said, you know, my kids are all proficient, or they're almost all proficient. How could it be possible that I could grow them any more? Where would you point on this graph to show them that it is possible? What if we went to group A? Those are schools that had similar proficiency levels, but they're growing their kids a lot more. So this is the proof of concept here. It's possible to make this kind of growth even if I have high achieving kids. Thinking about that check engine light I had on earlier, this is where we're most concerned about the metrics that we have at this school. Not only are the kids far behind, but they're also not growing very quickly. So proficiency is low, and they're also growing slower than predicted. We want to think about how can we help these schools make more growth to make sure their kids are college and career ready by the time they're graduating. Most of the cases, they're going to be right in the middle somewhere. You know, A, B, C, and D are kind of outlier cases where you're far away from average. Most of our schools in our state are going to be closer to where these two axes meet. You're about average in terms of proficiency with your kids and average in terms of how much they're growing. We also have grade level scatter plots for you. Depending on the grade span at your school, that might be 1 or 2 pages worth. We have reading on the left column and math on the right column for those grade levels. On the back page, we have some additional information that might help you think about what we're controlling for and other things. We've explained the 1 to 5 value-added scale. State average for similar kids is 3, and then we have some information for you about where people fall on where schools fall on that scale. We have a little bit about the number of students weighted and kind of guarding against the student group interpretation that we discussed earlier in our example. We have the control variables listed by model, and you'll note that English proficiency by category level and disability by severity level is how we're describing the what I described in more detail earlier. Mobility is new. That's number 8 on our list. That means that if mobile students across the state grew slower than non-mobile students, we're measuring that and taking that into account when we're seeing how much did your kids grow.
How is that measured? We have a few schools where the 3rd graders taking the WKCE 1 year, the same students do that same class in 4th grade. It could be a completely different group of kids because there's so many that are moving in and moving out.
Okay, so this question is about what if we have mobile kids and some of them aren't the same cohort when they're in 3rd grade and they're in 4th grade. So it's important to note that when we're looking at value added, it's always at the individual kid level when we're starting to look at longitudinal growth. So let's take the case of Jimmy again, my favorite name I use for kids. So if Jimmy's a 3rd grader in your school and takes the WKCE in November, then we see how much from that point in time till the end of the school year he was in your school. So let's say he was there all the way to the end of the year. So you're going to get 100% credit for that kid as long as Jimmy takes a WKCE anywhere in the state of Wisconsin that following year. So it's all about individual kids that you had at your school between the testing event and the end of the school year. As long as we have that data somewhere else. So if you have an entirely different group of kids at 3rd grade and 4th grade, as long as we can track how they scored the following year anywhere in Wisconsin, we can measure how much they grew during the school year with you. Does that make sense?
Okay, so then that growth would be counted
For your school, yep.
then with us,
That's right. And if Jimmy moved after half the school year, you'd only get half credit for that growth. And then wherever we saw Jimmy go to, that school would get the other half of that school year for their growth. We've got some resources on our website just to let you know about that.